They teach you to picture William Wallace as a painted hero, blue-faced, sword raised, roaring freedom across the Scottish hills. A patriotic firebrand, gone in a blaze of medieval glory. That's the poster, the myth, the Braveheart you cheer for in the dark. But the truth is far, far uglier. Imagine iron chains clanging over cobblestones as a broken man is dragged face down through the filth of London. Picture skin flayed by the street itself, crowds spitting, jeering, hurling dung. Hear the rasp in his throat as a noose tightens, loosens, tightens again, denying him the mercy of blacking out. Feel the hot blade slice him open, intestines steaming in the summer air while church bells keep ringing. See a severed head dipped in tar, glistening like a grim torch above London Bridge. And know this, every moment of that spectacle was planned, rehearsed, political theater of the most sadistic kind. We're about to peel back the legend and watch William Wallace die the way King Edward I wanted the world to remember slowly, publicly, and with enough horror to choke an entire nation into silence. Because once you witness what really happened on 23 August 1305, you'll understand how a single execution tried to strangle Scotland and accidentally carved its battle cry instead. King Edward didn't just want Wallace gone, he wanted him unmade. The English crown had spent years chasing this towering rebel across glens and forests, watching him slip through sieges like smoke. When Wallace was finally captured near Glasgow, Edward saw an opportunity, turned flesh into propaganda, fear into a warning no Scot could forget. So the trial was set, peace theater. Wallace was paraded into Westminster Hall, shackled like a beast, forced to listen as English justices charged him with treason against a king he'd never sworn allegiance to. He tried to speak, "I was never Edward's subject." It didn't matter. The verdict was pre-inked, the sentence rehearsed, hanged, drawn, and quartered. The ultimate punishment for traitors, reserved for those whose very existence challenged the throne. But it gets worse. You don't learn this in history classes out there, but Edward tweaked the ritual for maximum hurt. Wallace wouldn't simply be escorted to the gallows. He'd be tied to a cart and dragged the 4 miles from the Tower to Smithfield Market, head bouncing off stones, skin ripped by gravel, sewage filling every cut. By the time the gallows came into view, his body was already half ruined. The rope went around his neck. The trapdoor never dropped. Instead, executioners hoisted him just high enough for his feet to leave the ground, then let him hang until his vision shrank to sparks before cutting him down again. They wanted him conscious when the real work began. A knife opened his abdomen, hands reached in, pulling loops of bowel into daylight. The crowd fell into a hush so thick you could hear Wallace's heartbeat until the hangman lifted the man's still beating heart, and the hush broke into screams. Organs were tossed into a fire stoked at his feet so he could smell himself burn. And still he breathed. Only after the evisceration did they show mercy, if you can call it that, by severing his head. The rest of him was sawn into 4 equal parts, each destined for a different Scottish stronghold: Newcastle, Berwick, Perth, Stirling. Roads that once carried his rebellion now carried pieces of his corpse, nailed high where every traveler could see flesh rotting against the sky. King Edward's message was unmistakable. This is your destiny if you defy England. Look upon the ruin of your champion and despair. But a funny thing happens when power overreaches. Terror can curdle into rage, fear into devotion. Scots who might have surrendered felt Wallace's agony like a lit brand pressed to the skin. They whispered his last gasps as prayers, recited the route of his butchered limbs like a map of vengeance. Children grew up tracing heroic myths over the stains left on castle gates. And within 9 years, Robert the Bruce would rout an English army at Bannockburn, yelling, "Remember Wallace!" as the spears advanced. So Edward's calculated cruelty boomeranged. Instead of erasing a rebel, he minted a martyr. And the legend only grew. Centuries later, when Scotland's national identity needed a face, they reached back to the man England tried to erase. They found not the sanitized Hollywood freedom fighter, but the mutilated body on Smithfield's scaffold, proof that some causes are forged in the furnace of horror. Because William Wallace's real weapon wasn't bravery, it was the English king's own brutality, broadcast in blood. You don't learn this in history classes out there, but Smithfield wasn't just a place of death, it was a stage. Market stalls were cleared, church bells silenced, and crowds summoned like spectators to a royal play. Wallace didn't just die for rebellion, he died for effect. King Edward I, called Longshanks, was no impulsive tyrant. He was a methodical architect of terror. This was the same king who expelled England's Jews, crushed Welsh resistance, and built an empire by brick, blade, and bureaucracy. To him, Wallace wasn't just a criminal. He was a symbol, and symbols must be broken in front of witnesses. And so his execution was more than a spectacle. It was an instruction manual in dominance. They could have ended Wallace with a sword to the neck, clean, over, forgotten, but instead they turned his death into a sermon of pain. First came the dragging 4 miles of torture disguised as a procession. Tied flat to a wooden hurdle, his spine rattled with every stone, eyes filled with dust, joints scraped raw. The people lining the streets weren't given silence, they were given a man slowly ground into pulp by his own execution. Next came the hanging, but make no mistake, they didn't want him dead yet. They wanted him desperate. So they dangled him at the edge of death until his lips turned purple and his body began to spasm, then cut him down. His lungs drew in air just in time to scream. The disembowelment was as precise as it was cruel. Executioners were trained to keep the victim alive just barely as they sliced open the belly and pulled out intestines, inch by inch. They'd stoke a brazier close enough for Wallace to feel the heat close enough to cook his liver while it still pulsed. And the worst part? He saw it all. Conscious, eyes wide, skin twitching from the pain, as they held up his genitals once a symbol of virility, manhood, rebellion, and flung them into the fire like garbage. This wasn't punishment, it was erasure. You don't learn this in history classes out there, but the English chroniclers documented his death not with remorse, but with pride. They admired how thoroughly he was dismantled. They believed terror could end rebellion the way fire ends plague. But the fire spread. Wallace's head, dipped in tar to keep it from decaying too fast, was mounted on a pike above London Bridge, glaring at the city he defied. His limbs scattered. Stirling, Berwick, Perth, Newcastle, each nailed high, each a warning. But in Scotland, they weren't warnings, they were relics. Peasants whispered to their children, "That's the arm that struck at Falkirk." Monks crossed themselves in the shadow of his thigh bone, and bards began to sing again, not of defeat, but of martyrdom. Because when you cut a man into pieces, you create something you didn't expect. You spread him. And you can't burn every memory. Wallace's death should have ended the dream of Scottish independence. That was the plan, make the people tremble so hard they forget how to stand. Instead, it steeled their resolve. Within a year, fresh rebellions rose. Wallace had no grave, but he had a presence. In taverns, in parishes, in the glens and woods where he once fled the English, his name echoed like a ghost that couldn't be caught, and in the heart of Robert the Bruce, his one-time rival, later redeemer, that name burned like prophecy. Bannockburn in 1314 wasn't just a military victory, it was a resurrection. Every English knight trampled into the mud, every banner toppled, every scream from Longshanks's heirs, it all whispered Wallace's name. That's the power of martyrdom. You kill the man, and in doing so, you immortalize the idea. So now when someone tells you Wallace died a noble death, correct them. He didn't die noble, he died torn, humiliated, screaming as crowds watched with morbid awe. But in that ruin, he became more dangerous than ever, because the crown misunderstood something vital. You can kill a rebel, but you can't kill what he stood for. They turned Wallace into a message. Scotland turned him into a monument. Was it worth it? Was Edward's cruelty just another tactic in imperial rule, or the exact thing that doomed it? Let the blood answer. Let the bones tell you. And let history remember that one of the most brutal executions ever carried out backfired so hard, it echoed into the identity of a nation. If you want more of history's forbidden corners, the darkness behind the legends, the gore beneath the gold, subscribe now, because what they sanitize for classrooms is exactly what they feared would be remembered. Next time, a royal court that drowned its traitors in wine and used their skulls as goblets.